Hi, everyone. Hey, 5 people. Look at that. Way to go. That's 5 more than I was wondering if we would actually get. How's that microphone going? Can you hear me okay? Testing, 1, 2, 3. Oh, we just lost 3 people. Yikes. So thank you to the 3 people now that have tuned in to join us. I've grabbed myself a little double espresso to get started. I hope you can hear me. Let me just, if you can hear me, just click in the text box and say something to let me know. Thanks for coming along. And Charlie is here as well. He's going to check in and say hello to everyone. It's been a while since you've seen Charlie. And let me just ask someone if they can hear this. And today we're going to talk about Mind, Brain, and Behavior 2 and about psychology careers. And some people have already sent me some questions asking me about both of these things. So that is the aim for today's series, video. If you are watching and you don't have access to the YouTube chat room, you can always email me a question. So I've got a dog eating my shoe at the moment. Stop that, Charlie. You can always email me a question and I'll just pop my email in the chat there so you remember. So I've got some questions already about Mind, Brain, and Behavior 2 that have been emailed to me by students who can't make it right now. Roy, you're a gem. Thank you very much. Always saving the day. I'm going to have to hire you at some point, I swear. How about we get into talking about psychology careers? Actually, let me talk about Mind, Brain, and Behavior 2 first, and then that will set the scene. You'll understand how collectively Mind, Brain, and Behavior 1 and Mind, Brain, and Behavior 2 can set you up to do a broad range of things in terms of future employment options. So you've done some research methods already. Now, the research methods and the critical thinking skills that you acquire in your psychology course are some of the things that are most broadly appealing to employers. Those advanced analytical skills, those logical reasoning skills, those data analysis skills, you would be able to use those in just such a range of employment situations. So if I think back over my career and even where I first started as a marine mammal trainer, there is certainly a lot of areas in which I could have used those fundamental data analysis skills, for example, to interrogate maybe husbandry and medical related data that I was collecting while I was looking after the animals. And speaking about animals, I've got a very eager puppy here who wants to say hello. You know, see, Charlie's grown. Thank you for the licks. So Charlie has grown. He's getting quite big now. Oh, thank you, Charlie. Yes. And he, of course, had to come along and say hello. But Charlie, there you go. Play with your toy. Charlie does not have advanced reasoning or analytical skills. I can testify to that at the moment. So, think about your research methods, skills, all of that critical thinking stuff. You could apply that to retail. You could apply it to business and commercial. You could certainly apply it to marketing, to legal situations, to all sorts of things. In fact, I did a lot of work with some barristers recently on the Royal Commission into the mental health system, and I was really struck at how similar the reasoning styles that the barristers used in terms of developing arguments, how similar they were to the types of styles which we would teach you about in a psychology course. Really, really interesting indeed. So the other things that you learned about in Mind, Brain, and Behavior 1 were, of course, neuroscience, sensation and perception. And you might think, oh, gosh, what could I do that's related to perception or sensation and perception? There's just so much you could do there. You could, think about anything that's related to sensation and perception. You could go into, I suppose, a more specialist application in terms of optometry or audiology or something like that. But not even that. Simon's taught you a lot about how we perceive color, how we experience the world around us, and how we experience spaces, for example. And that could be certainly the strong intersections with art and with architecture and so forth. So many different places where you can take that to. Of course, with learning and cognition, thinking about memory, you've learned a lot about language. Now, if you build upon all of this, what you're going to pick up in Mind, Brain, and Behavior 2, which starts with my section, which is about clinical psychology, so about mental health issues, about mental illness. We're going to talk about and consider and learn about a broad range of experiences and issues around mental health, including how you would and why you might classify mental illness, why you might have a taxonomy of various mental illnesses that allows you to differentiate between different types of experiences, and indeed why you might or what you need to, or what you could consider, I suppose, in terms of what might constitute mental health and mental illness. That's a really fundamental question. It's a very complex one. I think, fact that we have diagnoses attached to experiences that we call mental illnesses certainly can, on the surface, give a misleading impression that we are either mentally ill or we're mentally well. And that is certainly not the case. It will be something that I talk about, that the experience of mental health and illness is far more dimensional. It's not so much categorical, and it fluctuates. Our state of mental health and illness fluctuates over time, and so forth. And we'll tease out some really then critical questions that come out of that, about how then do you apply a categorical diagnosis to an experience. So how do you apply a diagnosis of schizophrenia, for example, to an experience, if it is the case that people maybe have a period of wellness and a period of illness recurrently throughout the course of schizophrenia. This was a complete mistake to bring Charlie into this room, I have to say, for this live stream. I thought it would be cute for him to say hello, but he is just not into it at all. We're going to talk about things like the increasing prevalence of disorders like depression. So unipolar major depression is considered by the World Health Organization to be the leading cause of disability in terms of Charlie, sorry, come here. No, that's my bag. The leading cause of burden of disease in the world at this point in time, and certainly moving forward as well. Disorders like depression and anxiety occur so often, yet relatively speaking, other disorders like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder or obsessive compulsive disorder, for example, these occur relatively less. We'll be teasing out why that might be the case, why some disorders occur more than others. We'll be looking at what actually constitutes various diagnoses, various disorders, what the experiences are that make up a disorder like schizophrenia, and what the experience is like. And you might be familiar, I think by now, with the Hearing Voices project that will be introducing the voices of people with lived experience of a range of disorders into the curriculum for you to learn from next semester, this coming semester. So you won't only be hearing from me in lectures, but you'll also be learning via some online modules and recorded videos that I've been making over the break. So this has been a big project I've been working on in the last month or so, is recording these videos, producing these videos with people with experiences like schizophrenia and like depression and like trauma and eating disorders and so forth. And we're going to for the first time in the curriculum, hear directly from people with lived experience about what they would like you to know about what that experience is like. So it's going to be quite, I think, a meaningful addition to the curriculum to really contextualize what we are covering in lectures. And we will look at different ways of thinking about mental illness and classifying mental illness, what some of the topical and emerging areas of clinical psychology are, and certainly we'll be looking at treatment, and we'll be considering in particular one treatment as an example, and that is a treatment known as cognitive behavior therapy. We'll be considering its roots, where it came from, what its core features are, and we'll be seeing some examples of cognitive behavior therapy again in video. We'll be going on an excursion to an art gallery where all of the works are produced by people with lived experience, again, of mental health issues. And so that's the clinical psychology section in a nutshell, I suppose. There will also be research methods again, and again, that will be via online modules, and those modules will be complemented in tutorial classes. So next we will have developmental psychology. So this is going to be fantastic. We have, for the first time, got Dr. Abby Brooker teaching in the first year program, and I'm really excited about that. Abby has got expertise in developmental psychology and is particularly experienced around student well-being and student mental health, and has made significant contributions to the university and to the sector in that area. And so it'll be really wonderful to hear from her for developmental psychology. And developmental psychology, like it suggests, is about how our psychological processes and makeup develop over time throughout the lifespan, not just when we are in infancy, but from birth all the way through to later life. That's what will be considered in that stage of the course. Next will be social psychology, which is all about, exactly like it sounds, how groups affect our functioning and vice versa. It's all about how interaction with others influences our psychological functioning. Next, we will have personality psychology, and personality psychology is different. It's about individual differences. So it's not a focus on groups. It's a focus on individual differences. Now, I should also point out that we have really brought out the heavy hitters for social and developmental psychology. So for social psychology, we have Professor Yoshi Kashima, who is certainly a very well-respected, internationally well-respected social psychology researcher, and equally so for personality psychology. We are so lucky to have Professor Nick Haslam, who is, I would say, probably the most prolific psychologist that I know in terms of research output and in terms of writing. And indeed, it's no surprise that he's written the textbook for his section of the subject. But if you ever want to read really interesting applications of psychology, like even how psychology affects how we feel about and how we go to the bathroom, Nicholas Haslam is your man. He is a wealth of knowledge, and he'll be talking about what makes you you and different to somebody else, and how we can think about personality, and whether or not personality is made up of types, or is it a collection of traits, and does personality change over time, or is it completely consistent across time and across situations. You'll be grappling with all of these sorts of questions and how to assess personality in a range of settings, including maybe a clinical and a forensic setting and more general settings as well. Nick Haslam is going to bring us home for the end of semester. So altogether, there are 5 sections of Mind, Brain, and Behavior 2, whereas with Mind, Brain, and Behavior 1, there are only 4. So this means that with the research methods online, again, we have, what do we have? We've got 3 weeks for each one of the lecture series. So I start the clinical psychology lecture series starts this is really hard to grapple, this rabid Labrador whilst trying to talk to you. Seriously, Charlie, take a chill pill. I start the semester with clinical psychology, weeks 1 to 3. That's what's going to happen first. Then it'll be 3 weeks with Abby, then 3 with Yoshi, and then 3 with Nick. And we have a different type of assignment. I will tell you at this point in time that the assignments, plural, I should say, and we'll have one due early in week 4 and then one due later around week sort of 8. They will be related to clinical psychology, and they will be related to a different style of writing that you haven't done in psychology yet, which is a lab report, but you won't need to produce the whole lab report. So I'm going to, oh, now he's eating his squeaky toy. God help me. I'm going to set up a process where you can learn to write lab reports about a really interesting topic, and learn to consider some data in a very straightforward and completely not stressful way at all. And in the process, really support you to learn this skill, which is report writing. So just like in semester 1, we learned the basics of writing a research project proposal with assignment 1. This time we're going to learn a different type of skill, which is lab report writing, which is the basic style in which empirical journal articles are published. But the topic's really cool and you're going to like it. It will actually be enjoyable. I promise. Cross my heart. So moving beyond first year, all of these topic areas actually get fleshed out in much more detail in future years. So if you take clinical psychology, for example, there is in third year a subject called the psychopathology of everyday life. Charlie, that's my bag. And the psychopathology of everyday life is a subject that is all about clinical psychology, all about mental health issues and mental disorder. And the name there is actually a tip of the hat to Freud and his first work entitled, which had the same name, Psychopathology of Everyday Life. And this was, and that's my other bag. Charlie, you're going to be the death of me. Here I was telling everybody that I was a good animal trainer, and you've just gone to pot, haven't you? Deary me. The idea here that Freud was trying to put across was that what he would call psychoses and neuroses that he was observing in everyday life, in his clinical patients, he could also observe in people in everyday life who were not in clinical treatment, in attenuated forms, in more subtle forms. And he was getting at the idea here that mental disorder is not necessarily a categorically different experience, but it's an exaggerated form of different experiences that might otherwise comprise the human condition. So, and speaking of treatment, if you imagine that clinical psychology gets fleshed out in more detail throughout the course, as does research methods. So there's, again, in third year psychology, an entire research methods subject. There are entire cognitive and neuroscience and cognition and developmental and social and personality subjects all the way through second and third year psychology. And that gets you to the end of a degree where you've got a very broad skill set, and certainly, again, very advanced skills by that time in terms of critical thinking and in terms of data analysis and in terms of logical reasoning and so forth. And all of these things are very broadly attractive to potential employers. And that could be anything from the Australian Bureau of Statistics, for example, which is a very large organization that governs the data collection and for the country with things like the census and general social surveys, the monthly household survey. So when you see on the news data about unemployment and about various social indicators describing the population, that's driven by a survey that occurs every month with 20,000+ people or something every month, carefully sampled from across the country. A really interesting organization to work for, and we certainly do have previous graduates working at the ABS. There's other organizations. If we consider, let's stay close to home for starters, consider organizations that are in the mental health sector. These sorts of data analysis and critical thinking skills that are complemented by psychological knowledge are really attractive to them as well. And you might be able to work not necessarily in a clinical sense, but maybe around a clinical service, maybe in terms of project management, maybe in terms of communications and marketing, maybe in terms of research and evaluation, in terms of policy development. There's a range of ways in which you could work with organizations like, for example, at the moment, we're partnering with Sane Australia, and I actually have a Sane browser open at the moment. So let me share that with you in the comment section. So there's a link to Sane Australia. So they are an organization that supports Australians living with severe and complex mental health issues. And similar to organizations, so I've actually got a few organization tabs at the moment, because I've been drawing up some legal documents for some research collaborations. So here's another organization called wellways.org. Now, wellways.org, believe it or not, is an organization that you could probably already start working with in your undergraduate career while you're still completing your psychology degree. They've got a lot of services. So Wellways has services pretty much nationally, but particularly across the Eastern Seaboard, and they offer a range of psychosocial rehabilitation services that hurt for people, and typically with again, severe mental illness. There's organizations like Beyond Blue that work more with mild to moderate anxiety and depression and so forth. But there certainly are organizations like Wellways, like Lifeline, for example. Do you know Lifeline? Lifeline is a great place to get some counseling experience if you are thinking that you might be interested in sorry, I'm on Labrador control right now. Come out here. Come on. Where's your elephant? Come and get your elephant. Come on, for God's sake. You ready? Get your elephant. So Lifeline would certainly be somewhere where you can gain some counseling experience while you are completing your undergraduate degree in psychology. And personally, I think that is a fantastic idea. If you are thinking that you might want to invest in future study beyond your bachelor degree to become a registered psychologist, there's a couple of ways you can do that, and we'll talk about that in due course. It's not the only option. If you wanted to continue with study, you could also go into an applied psychology master's, for example. And we'll talk about these in a minute. But Lifeline's a great way to test the water and to cut your teeth and see if you actually like clinical work, counseling work, and if that is for you. And some people will find it is, and some people will find it is not for them. It is certainly not for everyone. You can be exposed to a lot of psychological distress and a lot of trauma and so forth. And any organization like Lifeline, or like if you're looking for a future employer, another one that I've got open here is On the Line. So On the Line is an organization that provides a range of counseling services. And I have over time, in one way or another, worked for or with every one of these organizations that I'm describing here. On the Line, like Sane Australia, has a 100% professional workforce, so everybody is registered in their particular discipline. Please do not play with my shoe and play with the stinky elephant instead. There. Completely lamenting bringing Charlie into this office. So On the Line runs a range of telephone counseling lines like Suicide Callback Service, Suicide Line Victoria, Men's Line, which is a men's mental health and relationship line. They do work with 1-800-RESPECT and take, which is a family violence service, and they take a lot of the calls related to that. So they're very much a specialist service associated with high risk and really sort of the pointy clinical end of the spectrum of issues that would come through on telephone services. Lifeline is more general. So Lifeline is a more general counseling service that isn't necessarily about suicide prevention, but certainly can be. And I certainly understand that suicide is a really scary thing. It is something we are going to talk about in Mind, Brain, and Behavior too, not in incredible detail, but we'll draw some broad brushstrokes around it and acknowledge that this is a real issue. Thousands and thousands of Australians die by suicide every year, and it is the leading cause of death for young Australians. So it's something we do need to talk about and start to think about. And certainly, if you decided that you did want to volunteer for one of these organizations, and I'd recommend Lifeline as a first start throughout your undergrad time, they would provide you with appropriate training in terms of suicide risk assessment and management, and you're supported in calls if risk does present, and you have appropriate support and debriefing and clinical supervision after calls and regularly to ensure that you are not being detrimentally affected by the work that you're doing. Hi, Roy. Yeah, so Lifeline has some training. Relatively speaking, compared to the others, I wouldn't say it's as extensive as the others. So, for example, On the Line has got incredibly in-depth, extensive, sort of high-level training, acknowledging that people have already been registered in their area of specialization. And there's essentially a 3-year revolving modular course that people do at On the Line. That used to be the case anyway. Sane is the same. Wellways is the same, except the Wellways counseling cohort is different. The Wellways counseling cohort is made up of people who either have lived experience of mental health issues, so maybe people that are living with bipolar or schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder or depression or OCD or what have you. And then also carers, so carers, people who are caring for family members of people who are living with schizophrenia and so forth. This gives the Wellways counselors, I suppose, on that helpline a very unique perspective. So if you are a student who is studying psychology and you also do experience mental health issues yourself, then maybe, and you're interested in becoming a counselor, maybe Wellways would be a service that you would be interested in looking at volunteering on. And certainly, I have connected numerous students with lived experience previously to Wellways, and they have worked on everything from the Wellways radio station. They've also got a radio station to the counseling service. So while we're talking about training and clinical training and counseling training, let's think about beyond the 3 years of the bachelor and the major in psychology. So the major comprises core subjects that you have to do because this is an accredited major. And then there are elective subjects that you would need to do as well to make up your credit load. And there are a range of really interesting subjects to talk about. But then we need to think about the 4th year. So this is the honours year. So the honours year is necessary if you wish to go beyond just graduating at that bachelor degree and potentially become eligible for general registration as a psychologist, and then either go and do the master's or the 4+2 program. I'll explain what they are in a bit. The honours degree is where you learn even more advanced skills around critical thinking, logical reasoning, data analysis, to be sure. This is where you'll start to learn what's called multivariate data analysis. And this is all preparing you to be, I suppose, both a scientist, and then the other bit comes, you'll learn more about therapies like cognitive behavior therapy, just the basics sort of at this point in honours. And you're starting to learn to become both a scientist and a practitioner. And that scientist-practitioner model is very much the model that clinical psychologists and psychologists more broadly are trained under. Charlie. So the other thing that you will need to do in your honors year is produce a research thesis. So this is where you actually get to participate in a research project. And many honors students will do a research project that involves first year students through the research experience program. So many of those research projects that you did in first semester and that you will be able to do in second semester to get that 5% credit towards your subject score, they're mostly honors students research projects that are being conducted under the supervision of a member of academic staff. So I have an honors student who is doing a research project in the REP. I've also got a PhD student who's doing a project in the REP in second semester. And then I have other honors students who are not doing research through REP, but are doing research in collaboration with actually all of these organizations that I've listed here. So SANE, Wellways, Lifeline, and On the Line are all working with me right now on a project that is ultimately aiming to improve clinical service delivery for people living with a particular type of disorder, which is called borderline personality disorder. And we'll talk more about borderline personality disorder in the clinical series. But we're doing this project, which is assessing what drives a particular problem in clinical service delivery in depth, and then based on those findings, or translate that into the solution and roll that solution out. So the honors and masters and PhD research projects that you can do in the school can be actually quite applied, and applied in a range of ways, but not necessarily. Perhaps you're more attracted to the pure science, and you might be really interested in doing some sort of modeling. Maybe you might be interested in working with Simon Cropper, for example, on some sensation and perception, or Jason around a similar area, or Meredith around some learning and cognition. Rest assured, there is a large oh, no, we're not eating that, are we? We're not eating that. No. There's a large roster of incredible academics that are just lined up and providing very high quality research supervision. And this is the idea. To become registered as a psychologist, you literally have to produce some research that contributes to the field. So when you do your honors degree, half of it is about coursework, learning more about each of the areas that you are okay. Each of the areas that you are that you've been learning in. So there might be a subject, for example, in honors that looks at really current topics in cognitive psychology. And believe it or not, many, many moons ago, this was my first introduction to the good Dr. Simon Cropper. He was my lecturer for honors level cognitive psychology back in 2006, 5, 6. Yeah. And if you all found the, I suppose, the unstructured or open or free nature of the Sunset essay to be a little bit anxiety provoking, I can tell you that the assignment that Simon set for assessment in that subject was to write about whatever we wanted, which was a little bit anxiety provoking, given that we were all vying for high marks for PhDs and whatnot at the time. But in reflection, it actually turned out to be great. It's where I formulated the idea for what I did in my doctorate. How and when do we start to find out about what honors projects will be available to us? So I suppose, Roy, well, first, that's an excellent question. And I suppose what you could start doing this semester coming is attend to the types of projects that are being offered through the REP, and that will give you some insight into the breadth of projects that are out there. There will be other projects, again, that don't tap the REP, and these will generally be clinical in nature. The way the research project allocation works in honours is that you apply to get in for honours and you select, once you're in, essentially, you rank the research projects that you're interested in. So every academic will advertise some research projects. You have a look through all of the projects, you identify the ones you're interested in, you rank them from 1 to 5, I think it is, in order of preference, and the staff do their best to try and match you with your first preference, because there are a lot of people, and maybe a lot of people might be interested in one particular project. You might not get your first preference, but I don't think I've ever heard of anyone who didn't get one of their preferred projects. So it's a really great experience. It's a great experience for supervisors as well. We love to work with new students every year, and it's a really, I think, very meaningful growth period. That honors year is very fundamental to your development as a psychologist and as an academic, and you'll come out of that honors year just being gobsmacked at what you have achieved during the year, and you'll feel quite galvanized moving forward and quite ready to go on into a range of areas. So if you wanted to go into research, you could do a master's by research or a PhD, where you could explore in detail a research question that you're particularly interested in. If you wanted to become a clinical psychologist or a clinical neuropsychologist, for example, you could go and register into one of our master's programs, which involve yet another thesis. So you're never going to escape a thesis at every level beyond honors. So yet another thesis, more coursework, and that coursework is going to be really advanced around assessment and diagnosis and the etiology of disorders and treatment and so forth. And then you'd also be doing a range of placements in the school clinic, but also in a range of partner hospitals and mental health service delivery settings, so that you got practical skills in working with different types of presentations and in different types of settings. The other alternative, if you didn't want to become a specialist psychologist, but you wanted to become a generalist, so I suppose it's sort of like the GP versus specialist contrast. If you wanted to become a generalist psychologist, then you could do the 4+2 route, which is completing your honors degree. And once you've completed your honors degree, you'll be eligible to register as a probationary psychologist should you enroll in the master's program or in the 4+2 program. So the 4+2 program, and then, oh, Charlie, what are you coughing up? God. I'm going to forward you a link via the chat window here so you can have a look at this. I prepared this one earlier. So the 4+2 program involves not doing a master's degree, but actually going out and starting to work in the field under the supervision of a registered supervisor. And that supervisor would supervise your work, would have essentially a training program developed for you as well. And so you would engage in training and in professional development over the course of those 2 years. And you would also be seeing clients on a regular basis and learning how to be a general psychologist in a very practical way, and you would then at the end of that still sit the psychology exam to become registered as a general psychologist. So there's more than one avenue if you wanted to work clinically. Now just bear with me one moment. I've got the weirdest computer setup going on today for this live stream. I can hear, Charlie, that you're over it, so just bear with me. All right. So if you did not want, that's Daddy's espresso. No. Definitely don't drink that, or today will not go well. I'm going to post for you in the chat window right now a link to our Master of Applied Psychology program, which is not about clinical work, but it's about all of the other areas in which you can work with psychology, and about refining your very applied psychological skills, those more general skills and the set of those that you'd get coming out of the undergraduate degree. So in other words, you don't need to do honors to do this master's degree. If you wanted to do your undergraduate degree and then go straight into the Master of Applied Psychology, you can. So it's about working in business and government, the non-profit sector, marketing, consumer research, all of those sorts of areas that I was talking about before, that the undergraduate degree gives you that generalist skill set in. That's what the Masters of Applied Psychology runs with and further develops for you, and then puts you in a really good place for Charlie. No, for working in the field. Is it true that if you do the 4+2, you can only get a government rebate of about 85 per session compared to 100? I am not sure of the answer to that question, Roy. However, that might be a question you could ask via that Psychology Board of Australia website, for example. Sorry, I don't know the answer to that one. Hey, do not eat my desk. No eating Daddy's desk. Okay, so we've talked about mind, brain, behavior too. We've talked about careers. Now I feel like somebody emailed me. Oh, for God's sake. Sorry, this is that's generally the phrase I utter when I open my emails and find another 30 or 40 emails in my email inbox. Okay. Oh, okay. So somebody did. So I've received an email here asking about the 4+2. So I think we've just sort of talked about that. And there's that link to follow up on as well. So if anyone had any final questions, I think now is the time to ask, or not necessarily forever hold your peace, but hold your peace for a couple of weeks until Mind, Brain, and Behavior 2 starts. And gosh, that's really soon, isn't it? So I will do another live stream the week before we start. Oh my God, that's next week. Okay, so next week, which is orientation week, the week before week 1, I will be doing the first Mind, Brain, and Behavior 2 live stream. Wow, it feels like it just feels like there hasn't been a gap. I don't know. Maybe you guys have had a nice break. I hope you've had a nice break and you've got a little bit of solace and respite in between the 2 semesters. Maybe got up to the snow, had a little bit of fun at the snow or something like that. Okay. Well, I hope you found this interesting. I hope you're back for Mind, Brain, and Behavior 2. I think you're going to find it interesting. I don't know if I've ever met anyone who didn't like Mind, Brain, and Behavior 2 and found it interesting. It's just so connected in a very relatable way to the human experience. Mental health and illness, social, personality, developmental psychology, all things we've experienced and do experience. Was I going to talk about how marks were standardized for Mind, Brain, and Behavior 1? I wasn't going to talk about it, but there is a document on the LMS in the MBB1 page where you can read about it. It was very, very simple and basically involved an upward stretching of marks. So people probably, if they look at their assignment marks, their REP mark, and then think about what they might have gotten on the exam, might have ended up doing slightly better than they thought they might have. And generally, the distribution was very good. It was almost the same as it was last year and the year before. Generally tends to work out pretty much the same. And but we did stretch the marks upwards a little. You'll be able to read the details in that document on the LMS. All right, so from myself and from Charlie, who is currently chewing my table leg, and it was just a terrible idea to bring him along to this, but it is what it is. Hey, stop that, please. No. I'm going to sign off. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. Hope to see you back soon, and look forward to many more of these with you. Oh, now, don't forget, if you're wondering, Mind, Brain, and Behavior 2 is going to be delivered via the Canvas system, which is the new Blackboard, the new LMS. So we're going to pilot a new Canvas system. You've all got access to it if you've enrolled in Mind, Brain, Behavior 2, and that will go live next week. Okay, guys, take care. I'll talk to you soon. Bye now.